I recently got into running Fireteam Grandmaster Nightfall speeds, and some of the builds that are meta right now are completely broken. One of them being a build that lets you instantly one-hit champs in GMs even while 25 under power, with no buff or debuff stacking, 0 buildup, it requires no aim or high skill techs, and it has nearly 100% uptime. Yo, what's going on guys? It's GMiners here, and in this video we are going over a Titan build that one-hits every single enemy type, because if it can one-hit champs and GMs, nothing will be able to survive it other than actual bosses, and the only thing required for the build is going to be your Arc 3.0 shoulder charge ability, and then some ammo in a 1-2 punch shotgun. I mentioned that we aren't buff stacking here, but we are going to be stacking a few damage sources, but in order to one-hit champs, all you need to do is proc biotic enhancements and 1-2 punch, and that should be it. So all other sources of damage stacking we have feeding into the build are going to come into play whenever you use your base melee, or if you use this to deal damage to bosses as well for an extra boost in DPS. We were using this in some of our GM clears for the Disgraced, and it sped up multiple rooms, allowing us to insta-kill anti-barriers that made all the adds immune. I'm sure this combo has been used before, but we personally saw Salt and Vendetta using it, which made us try it out, so links to their channels will be in the description below. They are way more cracked than us, so definitely make sure to check out their GM speed clears. And if you guys do want more of these OP-ass GM builds, make sure to drop a like and sub down below. As of right now, only around 17% of you guys that watch these videos are actually subscribed, so click that red button, and let's get into it. The main essence of the build will come from our 1-2 punch shoddy and the exotic gauntlet Synthoceps, but on top of that, you are going to need the right subclass setup, so let's start there. We are going to be on Arc 3.0, and for our super, we are running Thunder Crash, which is an obvious choice, and it also helps in taking out champs and bosses in GMs. After this, Thruster is going to help us stay more mobile while using the build, allowing us to close gaps to use our melee ability for ad clear, and then the most important part of the build is going to be Seismic Strike. This is, to my knowledge, the hardest hitting melee of the three and the most practical to use with our setup, and with this, we will also be blinding everything nearby after landing our melee, which helps us get out of sketchy situations. And lastly, I just run Storm Grenades because these are broken, but I think Pulse Nades could also help as well. For our aspects, first is going to be Touch of Thunder. This allows our grenades to have some beefed up effects. So for Storm Nades, they just pulse more and track, which means more damage and better ad clear. But the reason Pulse Nades could also be good is these create ionic traces over time, so they will aid in ability regen if you find yourself needing that. Second is going to be Knockout. Breaking shields or making an enemy crit gives our melee increased range and damage. This damage increase is 60%, which is super solid, but it honestly won't come into play until after we start killing ads and champs. But the nice benefit is that we do trigger health regen and amplification on normal melee kills, which helps keep us alive. This will also give us 4 fragments to use, so first and foremost in endgame content is going to be Spark of Resistance. Very simply, this is going to give us 25% increased damage reduction whenever we are surrounded, and the nice part is this lines up with how Synthoceps work as well, so they pair nicely whenever we go in for melee kills on champs. Spark of Shock is going to give our grenades the ability to jolt targets. This is going to be especially helpful if going against overloads and using overload arc grenades, and then in general just helps something like Storm Nades ad clear more efficiently. Spark of Recharge is up next, and this gives us 400% increased grenade regen rate whenever we are critically wounded. This should actually happen a bunch since we are always playing in the front line taking damage, so that helps with our grenades uptime for ad clear and then also for overloads. And then lastly is Spark of Feedback. This just increases our melee damage by 75% after we take melee damage ourselves. That will last 5 seconds, so if we ever get in a melee battle with an ad or champ, this should help us win it. That is going to be our full subclass setup for the build. So now taking a look over at the perk 1-2 punch, this is going to give us 200% increased melee damage. And to proc this, we just need to land all of our pellet shotguns from any single shot. And this is then going to last 1.22 seconds, which should be long enough for 1 shoulder charge or usually 2 melees, depending on melee speed and shotgun handling, to my knowledge. Now, against bosses, this is going to go up to 350%, which is a 4.5x increase in our base melee. Now, the only thing you actually need to know with this setup is that in order to hit everything, including the shoulder charge and proc 1-2 punch, you are going to need to slide first. So the combo is slide, then shoot, then melee. And the reason for this is that we do keep our momentum with shoulder charge even while shooting when we do a slide. Otherwise, if you do just sprint and then shoot, you won't be able to proc shoulder charge because your momentum goes away. Synthoceps, on the other hand, give us a buff called Biotic Enhancements. This also gives increased melee lunge range, which does help with ad clear, but more importantly, we get an additional 200% increased melee damage whenever we are surrounded, which is how this perk procs. Our supers will also deal 50% more damage as well, which is nice, but that means with 1-2 punch shotguns at 200% and biotic enhancements at 200% as well, we are getting two 3x increases, which multiplies up to a 9x increase in our shoulder charge damage. And then on top of that, this goes up by an additional 25% on arc burn strikes, which is an 11.25x increase in total with just these two things stacking. The mods that I do recommend you run on this build are going to be as follows. First and foremost is going to be Melee Wellmaker. This spawns in elemental wells that match our subclass type on charged melee kills, which should also spawn them on knockout kills as well. Elemental Charge is going to give us stacks of Charged with Light whenever we pick up Elemental Wells, and this is going to be 2 stacks when these match our subclass, which they will. And then lastly, you will need Heavy Handed. This automatically returns 50% of your melee energy when using a melee, and then consumes 1 stack of Charged with Light. Now, after this, for solo play and for group play, the mods are going to be a bit different. For solo play first, I recommend Bountiful Wells to double your elemental well generation, and then Well of Striking for increased melee energy back when grabbing wells. These combine better when solo to give you 100% uptime on your melee. For group play, on the other hand, I personally recommend Well of Ions, which gives you a 30% increase to melee damage, and then whatever final mod you also want works. The reason for this swap is to make the mid-game better overall, as you will constantly be dealing more damage from your base melee when ad clearing, and you should have plenty of elemental wells around from your teammates. Assuming everything stacks to its highest, Well of Ions gives 30%, which is 1.3x. Spark of Feedback is 75%, which is a 1.75x. Knockout is 60%, or a 1.6x. Biotic Enhancements, as we covered, is 200%, which is a 3x. And then 1-2 Punch, as we also went over, is technically 350% at its maximum, which is a 4.5x. So since everything multiplies together, this would come out to 49.14x, which is actually a 4,814% increase if everything were to stack against a boss. And then some if you also incorporate the 25% from acute arc burn when using this in arc GMs. But I would say in most practical applications when going against champions, you're typically going to be getting Well of Ions, Knockout, Biotic Enhancements, and then 1-2 Punch at 200%, which is an 18.72x or 1,772% increased melee damage, which is still insane. Let me know your guys' thoughts on the build in the comments below, along with your favorite GM to run this season with all of the broken arc builds and arc burns. I do also stream a bunch over on my Twitch where we run speedruns and low mans, so a link to that and my Discord server are going to be in the description below if you want to check those out. Anyways, that's all for this video, guys. As always, have a good one. Peace.